right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Carrie, for that really nice introduction. And thank you all for taking the time to hang out for this last presentation. I know it's kind of late, but today I'm going to be discussing artificial pond construction as a method for creating suitable oviposition habitat for Oregon spotted frog. And so I want to start by just talking a bit about the species that I focused on, and that's the Oregon spotted frog. So this frog species is federally listed and state endangered, and its habitat once encompassed much of the West Coast and now is limited to only a few isolated areas in Washington and Oregon state. The species is unique from other frogs because it's highly aquatic, meaning it needs water to live in and to move around between locations. It requires seasonal wetlands with connection to permanent water. And the species faces many threats that we're going to discuss in just a moment, but breeding is one of the biggest challenges for this species, and I'm going to refer to the breeding process as oviposition throughout this talk. And so only about 1% of the larvae from Oregon spotted frog eggs survive. And so I've listed on this slide a few of those breeding specific metrics, and I'll talk more about them as we kind of go through the presentation. Okay, so like I mentioned, the species faces many threats, including habitat loss from development, pressure, and lack of preservation of wetland landscapes over time. Disease can cause widespread population damage to sensitive amphibians like Oregon spotted frog. Invasive species like reed canary grass and bullfrogs, which are a large frog species that will eat anything they can fit in their mouth, including Oregon spotted frog. Interestingly, Oregon spotted frog habitat needs actually conflict with salmon habitat needs. And this can cause some really interesting tension, conservation tension on the landscape. There's a large push in our region and a good understanding of how to restore landscapes for salmon. But that same understanding and funding is not there for restoring landscapes for Oregon spotted frog, which means salmon often get prioritized, which can jeopardize the delicate habitat needs of Oregon spotted frog. So restoration practitioners and conservationists who are prioritizing the species use lots of techniques to do so, including monitoring populations, preserving land where Oregon spotted frog exist, and treating invasive species like reed canary grass and removing bullfrogs. And newly, restoration practitioners are exploring managing habitat through the use of things like water control structures, building beaver dam analogs, and folks are also attempting to build habitat that's suitable for Oregon spotted frog and can be used in the long term. So today I'm going to be talking about my case study where I monitored one of these brand new innovative attempts to create habitat for Oregon spotted frog. I wanted to better understand how water depth, hydrology, dissolved oxygen levels, temperature, vegetation composition, and vegetation height vary at constructed and natural wetlands along Bloom's Ditch. I also wanted to understand what percentage of wetlands would be optimal habitat for Oregon spotted frog during the 2024 and 2025 breeding season. So you may be wondering why this is important work for the future of Oregon spotted frog. So first, the Black River Basin, where I conducted this study, is one of the last strongholds left for this species. There's still a significant population that's surviving here. Current management strategies are ongoing. There is no leaving Oregon spotted frog habitat to natural processes at the moment. Regular mowing and monitoring is a must. This constant upkeep is expensive and challenging for agencies and local organizations to fund annually. There's a lack of research and understanding around how constructed habitat in the Black River Basin will, or even if it even can, perform for Oregon spotted frog. No agency or organization has created habitat to the scale of this project in this area, and no researchers have monitored constructing habitat this intensively. Okay, so I want to introduce you all to the constructed wetland I keep referencing. This project is located along Bloom's Ditch, a location known for Oregon spotted frog occupancy. This ditch was channelized over 100 years ago to support agriculture. Today, the property still supports a series of seasonal wetlands. This project was implemented by Capital Land Trust at their Bloom's Preserve site and was funded through the Office of the Chehalis Basin. The wetland was constructed in August of 2023. And as you can see in both the photo and the as-built design that's on the screen here, there are 6 pond clusters, each with 4 ponds. Each pond is 1 meter deep and surrounded by an excavated breeding shelf that's 15 centimeters deep. It was designed to both create year-round water supply, which is very important for summer Oregon spotted frog habitat, as well as create oviposition habitat. This project also included a significant amount of reed canary grass treatment and removal using both herbicide and mowing. And it also included lots of native emergent plantings, as well as planting willows too. During this project, I didn't only monitor the constructed wetland, I also looked at a wetland that is just upstream about 1,000 linear feet from the constructed wetland. This wetland is also managed by Capital Land Trust and is known location for Oregon spotted frog breeding. Around this area, agricultural operations continue to exist, and regular haying keeps grasses short and suitable for Oregon spotted frogs oviposition needs. So this project overall encompassed a significant amount of data collection on many variables over a 2-year period of time at 2 different sites. And so for the sake of time in today's presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on what we learned about the constructed wetland and its effectiveness at providing oviposition habitat. But I will answer questions about the natural wetland after. Okay, so methods. Like I mentioned earlier, I looked at several variables that can impact Oregon spotted frog oviposition habitat. So during this presentation, I'm going to focus on water depth, vegetation height, and vegetation species and cover. I had various data collection methods. So first, at both the constructed and natural wetland, I placed static data collection points using a GPS unit. They were marked on numbered wooden stakes, like you can see in the picture here. And they were used in both 2024 and 2025 data collection. I also used a smartphone and Survey123 to collect additional data points. And then I also had 6 continuous water level loggers placed on the breeding shelves in the constructed wetland and in 3 areas we knew oviposition occurred in the natural wetland. To analyze this data, I used ArcGIS Pro to perform a spatial analysis. And most of this was done through interpolation using the Kriging process. And I also examined plant communities using PCORP. Okay, now we get to the fun part, the results. So as a reminder, the ideal water depth for Oregon spotted frog oviposition ranges from 9 to 30 centimeters. So the deep pools, the deep excavated pools had water depths of 80 to 100 centimeters, and the breeding shelves had water depths of 30 to 100 centimeters. And we're talking about 2024 right now, which is the top photo in the top map on the screen. And so both of those are too deep for Oregon spotted frog suitable oviposition conditions. So most of the locations where it was suitable water depths occurred on the southwest side of the constructed wetland. And you can see the areas that are shaded in light green and yellow. And I also kind of circled the color here so it's easy for folks to see. And so about 31% of the constructed wetland had suitable water depths for oviposition. Now in 2025, which is the map on the bottom, again, the deep pools and the breeding shelves were too deep for the suitable oviposition conditions. But there was 37% of the constructed wetland that had desirable water depths, and those existed on the outside portions of the constructed ponds, so kind of around the breeding shelves. And again, they're in that green yellow color, and that I circled on the map there as well. Okay, so the next variable we're going to talk about is vegetation height. And as a reminder, ideal vegetation height is 10 to 20 centimeters, with 15 centimeters kind of being the sweet spot. So in 2024, we're looking at the top map again here. Suitable vegetation was 30.7%, so about 30% of the wetland. And that existed between the breeding shelves and the edges of the wetland. So it's in that like light green and yellow color. And you can see it's quite a significant amount of the area. And in 2025, it decreased significantly to 7.4%. And those, the suitable areas were, again, between the breeding shelves and the edges of the wetland, but they were a lot less significant. And I want to make a note about site conditions between the 2 years. So in 2024, the wetland had just undergone significant disturbance as it was being built. And there was a huge amount of effort that went into reed canary grass treatment, so mowing, herbicide application, removal. And so there was a lot less and shorter vegetation. But quickly, reed canary grass took back over, as it does. And with some lack of funding and capacity, it was challenging for the managing organization to offer the same level of maintenance that next year. And so that's why we see that significant difference in vegetation height between the maps there. Okay. The last variable that I'm going to talk about is vegetation species and cover. And so just as a reminder, ideal vegetation cover is pretty high sun exposure, so 20 to 50% cover. And preferred vegetation species are emergent species like sedges and rushes, but short stature grass can also be acceptable for oviposition to occur as well. So in 2024, the most suitable vegetation species and cover were in areas where sedge and rush were evident along the breeding shelves, and then these newly planted willows were quite short at the time, so came in as being an acceptable height. And then in 2025, the breeding shelves were the most or had the suitable vegetation type and cover. And so in 2024, it was 2.9%, and then that increased significantly to 18%. And again, a note here, the water depth in 2024 was significantly deeper, and the vegetation had just been planted like a couple months before, and it was very young and like you were not able to see it beneath the water. And so it was probably there just like being small and dormant. But you can only see in the map the areas that it was visible. And then in 2025, it was so much more robust. The water levels were much lower, and it was really evident on those breeding shelves that there was significant emergent vegetation. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to understand how many of or how these variables could be combined to better understand the big picture of oviposition suitability. So water depth, vegetation height, vegetation species, and vegetation cover were all combined and weighted to create a surface layer that displayed suitable habitat for Oregon spotted frog oviposition. So in 2024, actually no habitat ranked as excellent or good for oviposition. And in 2025, only 0.1% ranked as good habitat for oviposition, and I circled the area on the map. It's a pretty small spot. Okay, so let's talk about takeaways. So first, the constructed wetland did create suitable habitat for oviposition. It was challenging to get all the variables and factors to align perfectly. But regardless, Oregon spotted frog did lay eggs in both 2024 and 2025 in the constructed wetland. So that tells us that it is providing habitat. I also think it's important to note that the constructed wetland varied significantly between the 2 years that data was collected, and it really didn't mimic the nearby natural wetland, which performed much more consistently between the 2 years. So overall performance is not necessarily stable, and it's prone to significant fluctuations depending on hydrology and site conditions. And ultimately, the biggest point I want to make here is that ongoing maintenance is required to continue having oviposition habitat. So lastly, I just want to share some management recommendations. So first, hydrological inconsistencies mean further monitoring is necessary to better understand how rainfall and groundwater impact water levels. The quickest impact is going to be through strategic mowing. And I want to note that management of sites like this is expensive. And as we've discussed, it's ongoing. It doesn't necessarily stop after 1 or 2 years. And mowing will be a vital part of that management. But if funding is slim, there may only be enough resources to mow the most impactful spaces. And so this map displays where the largest mowing impact will be based off of the results. And I also want to note that I'm referring to this as strategic mowing because there are areas that I'm recommending that the land manager intentionally do not mow to discourage breeding in areas where we know drying is going to occur before eggs hatch or may result in larvae being stranded. So beavers historically supported Oregon spotted frog by creating pathways or channels from seasonal wetlands to permanent water. So this site does have beavers, which is really awesome. But one of my recommendations is to mimic beaver behavior by mowing access pathways from the ditch, which holds permanent water, to the pond sets, and also between the pond sets themselves. This will allow access paths for Oregon spotted frog to move freely between the aquatic sites and reduce possible stranding and predation from invasive species like bullfrogs. I'm also recommending removing the planted willow strip. And this might sound strange, but soon these willows are going to grow to create significant vegetation cover, which is going to be unsuitable for Oregon spotted frog oviposition. These willows happen to be located in part of the area that is most suitable for oviposition. So in the near future, they're actually going to pose quite a problem. And so that's just a recommendation, and it's hard to know exactly how these kinds of things are going to pan out until you have it on ground. Lastly, climate is expected to continue to shift in the near future, and modeling for climate change before making any big changes, especially when we're talking about any further excavation, will be really advantageous. And so that's going to include continual monitoring on the site as well. So I just lastly want to take a moment just to acknowledge that doing a project at this scale takes a lot of support from a lot of different folks. So I want to say thank you to everybody. And I'm happy to take any questions that folks might have.